Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel focused on learning about theories of everything, how we can apply them, and what they are, and looking at some specific theories of everything in great detail. We've covered the ancient Egyptian tree of life, and now we're covering the reciprocal system of theory. We've got several more on our plate, but we want to get a little bit more here on the reciprocal system. Today is video number 308 that we've done on the reciprocal system of theory from Mr. Dewey B. Larson. Mr. Larson was an American engineer who lived back in the 20th century. He died back in 1990, left behind a small group of dedicated researchers who have tried to carry forward his work. We're looking at one of them today, Dr. KVK Nehru, and he wrote an article that we're going to look at that's called Multidimensional Space-Time. And this is an article that's going to go into some of, looking at some of Larson's work from a book that he wrote called Beyond Space and Time, which was his final book published posthumously. And this was his foray into metaphysics, including religion and psychology and philosophy and a little bit of biology. And Larson, this book was seen by some of his followers as a little bit of a blaspheme because they thought that Larson would never want to have this published. Larson was kind of a hard-headed scientist, and he just wrote all this stuff as kind of his own private musings, and he would never want to have this published. But his wife published it after he died, and I personally think it's definitely was worth, publishing it. And it looks like it's a pretty complete work as well. So Nehru's going to address some of that. Before we kind of get into what Nehru talks about, just a little brief summary of Larson's theory itself. Larson contended that we live in a universe made entirely of motion. Not matter and not energy, but motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space-time. He, in fact, called it space-time at the very beginning of his articulation of his two fundamental postulates that occurred in the late 1950s. He eventually decided to use the term motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time have no independent existence. They just exist together in motion. And motion is basically a ratio or a fraction with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator. This brings out a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. Space and time both have the same qualities. So space and time are both three-dimensional. They have XYZ coordinates, or with time, they have three separate independent coordinates. And then space and time both have aspects that are progressing. Larson calls this clock time and clock space. The clock is progressing. It's always getting later and later and later, but in no specific direction. That's what Larson calls a scalar motion. It's a motion with a magnitude but no direction, no specific direction. You can also apply that to space. Clock space is the fact that everything is getting farther and farther and farther apart, but in no specific direction, which you would use a balloon with dots on it as a model there. You blow up the balloon, all the dots are moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. And then also space and time are both quantized, meaning that there is a minimum unit of space and a minimum unit of time. If you don't have a full unit of space, then you do not have space. If you don't have a full unit of time, then you don't have time. If you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light. And the speed of light in Larson's system is what he calls unit speed. This is the background or the origin or the ether, the reference point of Larson's universe, which means that half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light, which goes right against Einstein's dictum that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. For Larson, it's the midpoint of the universe, and half the universe is moving faster. That he calls the cosmic sector. The half that's moving slower than the speed of light, he calls the material sector. The material sector and the cosmic sector are identical, except that the roles of space and time are reversed. In the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and you have clock time. Time is always getting later and later and later. In the cosmic sector, you have coordinate time, and you have clock space. Everything's getting farther and farther and farther apart. And so you can extrapolate one to the other. And if you cross that speed of light boundary, the rules change, the rules invert. So those are things that you have to keep in mind. Now, with his last book, Beyond Space and Time, he moved into a different realm. And I think Nehru is going to address some of the new findings and the new discoveries of his book Beyond Space and Time. Basically, Larson took those 2 fundamental postulates, and then he went through a deductive process, 165 steps, and he turned those 2 postulates, well, we really only talked about one of them. The other one is just basically that the math, it has to do with math and geometry of the universe. And he took those 2 postulates and through a process of deduction, if this then that kind of thing, he derived an entire theoretical universe. And that's how he ended up writing his books, the scientific books on the chemistry and the astronomy and the physics. And but then he went further than that with the Beyond Space and Time book. Now, I've done, not only did I do 15 videos on Larson's deductive process, those 165 steps that he went through to go from his postulates to a theoretical universe, but I've also done about 85 or 90 videos going through his book Beyond Space and Time in its entirety. So those are back in the archives if you want to check those out. But we're going to check into what Nehru has to say about all this right now. Multidimensional space-time. I think this article was written in 2003, 2002. And here goes. We have been working on a synthesis of the new discoveries relative to Larson's Beyond Space and Time. The following is a summary report of the development in thought so far. Recapitulating, space, time, and speed or motion, are quantized. There are several speed regions of the physical universe which cannot be legitimately represented in the conventional three-dimensional spatial reference frame. So that's coordinate space. So he's talking about coordinate time, and maybe some other things as well. In all the cases where legacy theory is encountering serious difficulties, the trouble arises because of the Procrustean attempts to fit all physical processes into the limited three-dimensional spatial frame. There is a conjugate sector of the universe, the cosmic sector, which can only be represented in the analogous three-dimensional temporal reference frame. Most of the mysterious astronomical phenomena that have no proper explanation in the conventional theory turn out to be the normal cosmic sector phenomena as they appear to us. High-energy cosmic rays, cosmic microwave background, and gamma-ray bursts are typical examples. Extrapolating the common sense view of the universe around us to the far-off regions, the very large, the very small, and the very fast, often does not lead to truth. Truth, and again, our human experience has shown this to us. There are critical points, thresholds, and boundaries in the universe, crossing which the phenomena change radically. This section is called 1, 2, 3, Many. In the universe of motion, speed is the primary reality. Space or time individually can appear only derivatively. Starting with a point having no dimension, one can generate a line by moving it along a direction in space. It is not possible to generate an area by a point. Moving the point simultaneously along two orthogonal directions in space, with speeds u and v respectively, for example, still generates a line only, not an area. In order to generate area, we have to start with the line as the generator. This means that the line should already be present before the movement in an orthogonal dimension takes place. Since, to start with, the line is generated by the movement of a point. The availability of a finite line segment in zero time simply implies that either the speed u or the speed v has to be infinite. But since speed is quantized, infinite speed does not exist. However, since areas actually exist, the requirement of the availability of a finite line segment in zero time can be met by another expediency, namely the possibility of multi-dimensional time. Suppose the motion, say speed v, which generates the line segment from the point, pertains to a time dimension, t2, orthogonal to the time dimension t1, pertaining to the speed u. Then, even though it takes time t2 to generate the line segment in the y direction, it would be as though it took no time from the point of view of time dimension t1. Thus, it would be possible to generate area, and in reality, the total process results in centimeters squared per second squared rather than centimeters squared per second, or whatever time space units you want to use. Further, since three-dimensional space volume exists, this could only be generated similarly by three-dimensional speed, centimeters third to the third over seconds to the third, with 3 mutually orthogonal dimensions of time available. If you don't remember from geometry and stuff, orthogonal means at a right angle. At least that's what I think it means. There is documentation of states of consciousness experiencing 4, 5, and higher dimensional space. This implies the possibility of n-dimensional speed, s to the n over t to the n, composed of n-dimensional space in conjunction with n-dimensional time, subsisting as a substratum for lower dimensional speed, space and time. In fact, Larson does allude to this possibility in Beyond Space and Time. Larson postulates that the third sector, the metaphysical sector, is outside, that is, not part of, the material sector or the cosmic sector. At the same time, he posits an evolution of the ethical control units pertaining to the metaphysical sector. But as I pointed out, evolution implies time. If the metaphysical sector is outside time, no change, and therefore no evolution is possible. But on the other hand, the possibility of higher dimensional space-time, of which space to the third power over time to the third power is a subset, in which they exist, not only renders them independent of the latter, but also leaves the possibility of evolution in other dimensions of time open. We have discussed the question of the dimensionality of space-time in reference to. We have shown that three-dimensional space or time could be represented by the 3 orthogonal rotational operators I, J, and K, the imaginary numbers, with the following properties. I squared equals J squared equals K squared equals -1. IJ equals negative JI and equals K. And JK equals negative KJ equals I. And I and KI equals negative IK equals J. In a closed group of operators like 1, I, J, and K, the result of the combination of any number of the basal elements is also a member of the same group. The result of any such combination can be known only if all the possible binary combinations of the elements are first defined in terms of the basal elements I, J, and K themselves, besides, of course, the identity operator 1. Suppose there are n basal elements, excluding the unit operator 1, in a group. Then the number of unique binary combinations of these elements in which no element occurs twice is n times the quantity n minus 1 over 2, the whole quantity over 2. We can readily see that a group becomes self-sufficient or finite only if the number of binary combinations of basal elements is equal to the number of those basal elements themselves. That is, if n times the quantity n minus 1, the whole quantity over 2, equals n. The only definite solution for n is 3. 0 and infinity are other solutions. Therefore, if we regard space space and time as a group of orthogonal rotations, its dimensionality has to be 3 in order to make it self-sufficient dimensionally. Otherwise, the number of dimensions either has to shrink to 0 or proliferate to infinity. This means that only three-dimensional space, or time, is self-sustaining once created, whereas the higher dimensional spaces, or times, have to be sustained from outside, because some binary combinations remain to be supported or defined from outside the group structure. Now, he is, I think, here neglecting like tetrahedral coordinates because he's insisting on the fact that these independent dimensions have to be orthogonal. But I mean, if you look at the work of Buckminster Fuller, he uses tetrahedral coordinates, and those are four-dimensional, and they are not orthogonal. So I think he's making an assumption, and it may be correct, but I don't know, but he's making an assumption that these independent dimensions must be orthogonal. Okay. We show this group property diagrammatically. Let the points or vertices represent the basic elements of a group, namely the operators, other than the unit operator. A line joining two vertices represents the binary combination. The triangle is the case in point. There are just as many base elements as there are binary combinations. In the group BC, the only binary combination is BC, but it cannot be defined in terms of either of the base elements. See, since BC equals B, for example, requires C to be unit operator, which it is not. He has a figure that is supposed to be portraying this, which I don't have access to. In the case of groups larger than 3, there occur binary combinations that cannot be defined within the group and therefore require external definition. It is interesting to note the cross, the 5-pointed star, and the seal of Solomon among these. Religious literature is replete with explanations of their symbology. The cross represents the second person of the Trinity, who stands for space and time, not yet separated but potential. The 5-pointed star is the symbol for the perfect man. The interlaced triangle symbolizes the reflection of God in man. There is a great science of chakras and mandalas known and practiced in India since the Vedic times, concerned with the invocation of the powers of consciousness through such forms. The function of the living and the non-living is the name of the next section. Suppose we take log entropy, logical entropy, to be the measure of level of organization in 3 space in the material sector. Then the corresponding characteristic in the cosmic sector that represents the level of organization in 3 time could be called cosmic log entropy. Now, since locations in three-dimensional space are only randomly connected to locations in three-dimensional time, it is difficult to see how the log entropy level of the material structure of the cell could be maintained against its spontaneous tendency to get disorganized, left to itself, by a spontaneous increase of the cosmic log entropy of the cosmic control unit of the cell, as Larson proposes. In Larson's work, he says that life is the result of a combination of a material unit and a cosmic unit occurring in the proper proportions and at the proper angle. To be sure, there are processes in our material sector where order could increase, like in phase changes, like in-phase change from gas to liquid or to solid. Speaking of the inversion of the S frame or spatial frame to the time frame that takes place on entering the quantum domain, the time region. Now, the time region is the region of within the material sector of action of less than 1 unit of space. If you don't have a full unit of space, then you do not have space. And if you do not have space, then you only have time, because the universe is made out of space and time. The universe is made out of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time. So if it's not made out of space, then it has to be made out of time. It's one or the other or both. And so if you don't have a full unit of space, then you only have time, and Larson refers to that as the time region. The time region is the region inside a unit of space. And this is the realm of, atomic phenomena and molecular phenomena. And the rules also invert when you cross that boundary. Just like when you cross the speed of light boundary, if you cross into the time region, the rules invert. The same is true of what Larson calls the space region. And the space region is in the cosmic sector, and it is a unit inside a unit of time. If you don't have a full unit of time, you only have space. So the space region is also the region there for realm of cosmic atomic activity and cosmic molecular activity. Okay, I think we're going to leave it right there, and we will take over tomorrow. I know that this is also very difficult. Nehru tends to go very fast. He doesn't really explain himself. I think he just kind of assumes that you're an engineer, and that all this language is old hat to you. So you might need to rewind me and go slow, but you might be able to get something out of this if you kind of persevere, and that's pretty much what's required for all of this stuff. So it just comes with the territory. If you want to learn quantum physics, you're not going to really get it by just sitting around watching 20-minute videos while you're eating lunch or something like that. So all this requires study. There's a reward on the other end, I think, that is quite substantial. Learning quantum physics or chemistry or physics or astronomy or any of these subjects, You don't learn them, people go to college or graduate school or whatever for many, many years to learn these things. So, okay, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you tomorrow. Have a great